Lovely to see you. We've had our 8 weeks on perfectionism. What I wanted to talk to you about was your realizations of week 1 and the realizations of the bigger picture from perfectionism, how you feel on week 8. How has that been working for you?
Do you know, Joy, it feels like there was light bulb moments every week. Week 1, I remember it felt in your face. Like the clearing was just, it felt incredible, and it felt so wide. It felt so widespread, and it was like kind of hit you in the face, really big, obvious.
Mm.
And after the clearing, all I could do was smile as the relief and everything. It felt amazing. And then the second week was different. The second week seemed a bit more surreptitious, maybe more under the radar, subconscious level. Could feel changes, but not. They didn't feel as massive as the first week had done. For me, the realizations were, now I wouldn't necessarily have identified anyone in my family as a perfectionist before this until you explained it. And then I was like, oh my word, the perfectionists in my family are just, it's obvious, so obvious now when I look at parents and grandparents and things like that. And for me, it was the realizations of how I had adapted my behavior, and basically to within the confines of perfectionism from their point of view. Maybe I didn't see myself as a perfectionist, but I adapted my behavior because of their perfectionism. But then I was still a perfectionist because I still had very high standards for everybody else that of course they couldn't meet. So for me, it was seeing the way I had changed my behavior to the not bother. What's the point? You're not going to make the bar, so just don't bother. And sabotaging myself so that I knew what my feelings would be before they were pointed out to me. It was like preempting it, so that so you expect it, but you create it because you expect it. So when the criticism comes, you were expecting it anyway. You can think about it logically in your head and kind of tone down the impact that the criticism has, but the criticism still has the same level of hurt and the same level of impact. So it's a very, very strange weave of how I changed my behavior to try and counteract the perfectionism and the criticism, but then it came anyway. And also the feeling of, and the belief, it's more than a feeling, it's a belief, the belief that I was flawed because of it, because I couldn't ever make the grade, or I was never that good enough. So therefore I was flawed because of that.
It's such a big picture, isn't it? That we
It's
don't realize we copy our parents. They criticize, so we criticize. The standards are set and expectations are set for us to live up to there, that may be flawed. This is that thing, isn't it? It's flawed before it starts, and then we follow suit because that's what we're shown, that's what we're conditioned to, and we don't even realize what we're doing. And we don't realize how we have changed our behavior. As you said, you have changed your behavior to suit the environment you were in, but it wasn't necessarily you.
No. And I was like, because I had an older sister who probably fitted into a perfection box in a lot of ways more than I did. So then you then have, well, you can't live up to parents, you can't live up to siblings. So you're in this other box that you're not perfect, but then you become perfect at being imperfect. And you're the perfect rebel, or you're the perfect something else that's not. And it's all about your ideal of what perfect is and what perfectionism is, which is taught by your parents. In our house it was more around academic perfection And I mean, my sister is very, very clever. You then kind of think, well, I can't achieve perfection in that area, but I'll be the perfect delinquent teenager, you know?
Yeah, this is the other side of the coin. We give up, we become apathetic. Um, we can have the OCD in the behavior in the mix as well. We go overboard with what we do and extreme levels of perfectionism. But essentially, it's telling everybody else that they aren't right and they're not coming up to perfectionism standards, which is probably what you have lived with the criticism from your parents. And it can get into such a big mix of apathetic, I'm not even going to try because in that person's mind, they're not going to achieve. I've tried achieving, I haven't done it, so they just give up on life and they give up on themselves. And it's such a waste of life
Mm-hmm.
that I think you realized as well, that
Yep.
trying to fit in all of these all of these goals of other people and expectations that you couldn't ever achieve.
No.
And
No.
it bleeds you dry.
Yeah. Oh,
The
it's exhausting.
the disappointment, the subjugation of the self, the sabotage of the self, all of these things that go on. It's not hurting anybody else but you. And then you're only living half a life instead of a full life.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
I think
even when you,
this was the
sorry,
realization for you. No problem.
yes,
This was the realization for you when you got into those first couple of weeks of, what have I been doing?
mm-hmm.
This is part of
Yes,
the light bulb, isn't it?
uh-huh, yes, and it's the disappointment, even when you do achieve, because it's not as good as it could have been, or it's not perfect. So you're just even when you achieve, you go, or if someone gives you a compliment, well, there's something on the back of that they're just talking rubbish, or they're just, you know, there's something else, because there's that belief that you're flawed, and you're, so there is this disappointment in life.
Don't deserve, don't
Mm-hmm.
deserve, not worthy. All of those things are underlying as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there can even be underlying trauma bonding to the failure, to
Mm-hmm.
the lack of achievement. The fear that goes with it was tremendous. We found an awful
Uh-huh.
lot around that and these underlying levels. It's amazing, all these jigsaw pieces that come in and
Mm-hmm.
are at play, and they are very different for everyone, as we saw in the group. For some people, some themes didn't apply, but really applied in other cases. And what you experience and what other people experience, it was all from criticism and authoritarian parents, school,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things that set these standards. But some of those standards are way out of date, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not part of this world.
No, and the relief that came with the affirmations in the mirror of I accept myself and my imperfections, and the relief that comes with that, like, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to keep striving to achieve something that's unachievable. And that for me was just the level of relief, and thank goodness I don't have to do that anymore.
Oh, you do have choice. You had choice before.
Yeah.
You just didn't realize you had choice. And
Uh-huh.
it's the understanding and the education that makes the difference, isn't it? And
Yes.
then, of course,
Yes.
you have the elimination of those emotions, etc., and drives.
Mm-hmm.
And it's reconditioning the mind to live.
Uh-huh. Yes. And when you have, it's almost like if you have a name for it, you go, oh, right, okay, that's perfectionism. And then it's like, ah, right, okay. And then you start to see the patterns, and then you start to see where all the dots join, and you're like, all right, okay. And then you go, right, I don't want that.
No.
And I noticed the way I talk to my kids is different. And I was a hard task. Well, do you know what? I'm still learning. I have been a hard taskmaster for myself and for them. And that's not fair. You don't want that for them. And so you notice when they do achieve things, like the praise, because it's given from a different place, so it's received from a different place. There's not that backing of, oh, but what, if I got 90%, well, what happened to the 10%? There's none of that. It's like, why you got 90% or you got 70%? The whole ethos around praise and communication has changed,
Mm.
and
Mm.
how we communicate, and how how we how we inspire, like how I inspire them. And there is still a way to go, because they still have little perfectionism things here and there as well. But it just is, everything's changed. The whole communication process between us has changed.
Wonderful news. Wonderful. And you
Yes,
don't want your children to live like that. You want them to have
absolutely not.
the liberty to be able to make their own choices. And
Mm-hmm.
the communication was one of the things that was quite startling to everybody on the 8 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
where they started to realize that their communication was very clipped
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and it was not expressing themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and how huge swathes of blind spots there were around communication. They
Mm-hmm.
thought they had communicated enough. However, from a person that was listening to them that doesn't have perfectionism, it had lots of holes in it. Well, I understand
Oh.
it, and then there's a gap, and then I understand that bit. The
Mm-hmm.
communication was really challenging in some cases over the 8 weeks of getting people to express, because they hadn't done that before and
Mm-hmm.
express their needs, because the
Yes.
perfectionism got in the way of their needs, and it was more the structure rather than them communicating.
Yes. And I've noticed it before previously, of how sometimes if you ask a question and people don't answer it, and I'm sure I have been one of those people that hasn't answered it in the past as well, and you really notice that it really brought it to the fore, and just noticing different scenarios where I am more comfortable communicating, and for scenarios that I am not as comfortable, and then looking at why. Well, why am I not as comfortable in that? All right, that's because of that. Right, okay, well, we can deal with that. We can do something about that. But yes, that the whole communication thing, that was a big eye opener as well. And again, I wouldn't have put that down to perfectionism.
No, it's so subtle, and
Aha.
how we brainwash ourselves to continue in the
Yes.
same way. And
Mm-hmm.
even if we know it's not serving us, or even if we know it creates disappointments, and essentially with perfectionism, we live unhappiness, because
Mm-hmm.
we're not getting that achievement. We're not feeling that hormonal oxytocin surge that we have when we have that.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
it depletes an awful lot of us, more than we understand, on a physical as well as an emotional and mental level. And I think that was a shock to quite a few people on the group course, that it's actually affecting your nervous system and your endocrine system.
Uh,
And again, the light bulb moments that came on from that, you're depleting all of you just
uh-huh.
mind.
Yes. And it was sobering to know how much the mind can impact the physical,
Mm.
just from your thoughts and your conditioning. And I don't mean just from it, but yeah, everything about you.
And it was
And
lovely
it's
to see you all growing in that confidence. And it was like taking overcoats off as you
yes.
as you took these layers off and started to
Uh-huh.
take control of the mind and doing
Yes.
you want it to do, not off at a tangent because of what it's been conditioned to.
Uh-huh. And interesting hearing feedback from other people of, well, I don't know if I want to give it up because what am I without this? And you
Yeah,
think, oh my word, why would you want it? You know?
yeah. And on an analytical level, we can say we don't want it, but the mind is stronger and more powerful than we think. And it convinces us that we can't possibly do it because, well, what will the mind do without all of this control?
Yeah,
And you think, well, the individual is going to be far happier without it. And they are
absolutely,
far
yes.
happier without it. But this is the addiction, isn't it? This is the addiction and the abuse side of
Mhm.
perfectionism and how the mind controls.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
what would you say the difference now is in a nutshell from those first few weeks and how you are now?
The realizations and the understanding of what I have lived and what I had adapted myself to that I no longer have to do.
Mm.
And the peace, but the compassion that I have for myself is night and day of what it was before, of not having to keep striving and not having to keep pushing and not having to exhaust myself trying to, and it comes down to as well trying to prove yourself all the time, not having to prove yourself, and the peace and the contentment and the relief that comes from not having to do that, and to give yourself a break and say, well, I might not have achieved that today, but look at what I did achieve. And
Mm.
looking at the flipping the coin to look at the positives of, well, maybe I didn't score off everything on my list, but I did
Yeah,
8 things off it or whatever, and taking the reward and what you have achieved rather than the punishment of what you've not achieved.
yeah, it's massive, isn't it?
It's huge, absolutely huge. And I look at people in my friends and family, and do you know, I'll just say to them, you need to do this, you need to do this. I was speaking to a girl at the gym and she was talking about her Christmas tree and how her son doesn't get to decorate it because he won't do it right. And I was like, I've just done an 8 week course of perfectionism. You need to do that.
It comes in so many packages, doesn't it? I've met ladies that nobody can hang the washing out but me, and it has to be all the same colored pegs, and they all have to be in exact
Eggs.
order. And this is where the OCD comes in.
Uh-huh.
But it's driven by perfectionism and it's driven by the mind. And
Yes.
it's time that we took control of the mind. And
Mm-hmm.
now, how much do you think you're in charge of your mind?
Oh, completely in charge of it. And and it's funny because sometimes, and I'll notice my mind trying to take back charge. I'm
Yeah,
like, no, I'm not having that. I'm not doing
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you know, it is a work in progress. And I don't, I'm not perfect yet, but it's so much better. It's night and day.
And I'll let you into a secret. Nobody's perfect.
And do you know,
We're
Joy,
not
that's the great
perfect.
thing. That's the best part.
Because you can adapt to whatever comes.
Uh-huh.
And having the freedom to do that you didn't have before with perfectionism,
Yes.
because the structure's too firm, too tight, and
Mm-hmm.
you can't make those choices. You haven't got those choices. Whereas
No.
now you have millions of choices that you didn't have
Yeah.
before.
Yep. And the whole, and this has been something that I've noticed over the last kind of months, maybe years, is that there's no wrong choice.
Mm.
You know, you make a choice. If it's not, if you want to choose something different, well, from there choose something different. And there's lots of, growing up, with growing up and things, and it was like, oh well, that was wrong, or that was a mistake, or you shouldn't have done that. Whereas it's like, well, it wasn't a mistake, it was a lesson. and I'll just make a different choice next time, rather than being a perfectionist thinking I didn't get it the first time and then beating yourself up about not getting it.
Exactly. The thing is, we get so bound by these goals and competition, competitiveness, and so on and so forth, that we lose out on a lot of the joys in life. And if you're more relaxed around those, well, these are the choices I have at the moment, but there will be different choices in a couple of weeks' time, and so on. And the world is your oyster. It's, well, I'll have this little bit today, then I'll have that little bit over there, and then next month I'll have that, because you can, and you
Yes.
have that liberation of the mind for you to decide what you want and for you to decide the outcomes. And the mind follows you, not the other way around.
Yeah. Do you know, Joy? It's brilliant. It's the best thing. The best thing.
And as we talked about, 8 weeks, 2 hour slot, that's 16 hours of your life. It's nothing, is it?
Yes. Nothing. It's not even a full day.
No.
Do you know?
And the changes
And
that you receive in that is enormous.
huge. And at when you first sent out the information, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I've got the time or the finance to be able to do that. And it's like, I couldn't have afforded not to have done it.
Mm. Mm. You're a completely different person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so many
And
doors opened for you. Things that have happened over those 8 weeks.
yes. Do you
What?
know, it's huge. And because when people say when one door closes, another door opens. It's like when one door closes, there are a million doors open.
That's right.
It's not just one. You're like, oh, there's more.
Yeah, yeah. That's choice, you see.
Yeah. And just, being when I was away with David, and previously I would have gone, well, this is totally out of my comfort zone, just different, just people, very, very wealthy people, and then there's me, and I would have gone, oh, I'm totally out of my comfort zone. But there's just this feeling of, well, I'm me. That's fine. This is good. And just having that confidence and that self-assurance and self-awareness that actually it doesn't matter what other people think, because that's their own stuff, and I'll just go about being me. It's quite
It's a really lovely feeling, isn't it, being you without all
cool.
these restrictions?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
as if you're fighting, before we started the course, it's as if you're fighting to get out of this
Uh-huh.
jail that has been built up around.
Out of this box that we've been put in, whether that's been by ourselves or by other people, put into this box, and just to be out of the box is really quite nice.
Well, I am just so delighted for you and all the changes, and they will go on being more changes and it's just the liberation of the mind. It's so empowering, and it gives you that confidence, and I think it gives you your place in the world too.
Yes, there's a serenity and a security around just being you in the
Mm,
world,
that's definitely. Mm.
with no expectation, and just kind of going with the flow and seeing what happens.
And of course, it gives you more tolerance. It gives
Yep.
you better awareness of what's going on, perceptions of others. And I'm sure you're picking up on perfection everywhere.
Everywhere I turn, I'm like, oh, there's another one. There's another one.
And when you think of the unhappiness that was lived, and all these people wandering around unhappy because of the control of the mind, and it can be changed very quickly.
Yes,
16 hours.
yes. Do you know, huge, huge changes in 16 hours. I did think that tonight, though, I was like, oh, we've not got it tonight.
There'll be a few people like that tonight.
All of us probably, Joy.
Well, thank you very, very much for sharing your experiences with me. And it helps others to understand what they're living and what they can live without, which is
Yeah.
the aim of the training, is for people to come along, change themselves, their lives, but also have those skills to not create it or stop it.
Yes. And giving people the realization and then the empowerment to be able to do it for themselves. That's priceless.
It is priceless. You can't put a monetary figure on it because it is
Oh.
priceless. There is just so
Mm.
much that you gain. The benefits are massive in every quarter, in relationships, in family, in career, everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.
The wonders of you instead of the mind, and how incredible it is, the amount of power we feed the mind every day, or the mind takes from us, making us exhausted, tired, because it is tiring when the mind is so much in control. And of course, you have underlying depression, trauma bonding to the mind, all sorts of things that are on the sidelines or appendages to the situation of the power of the mind, and how it makes us very unhappy when we have this sort of dominance from the mind that is not serving you. And when anything is making you unhappy, it's not serving you at all. And by taking this program of perfectionism, or liberating the mind from perfectionism, these people all have got the happiness back. That's worth its weight in gold. Such an honor to be working with people on this level. And remember, the authentic self is worth getting to, because it brings us so much joy, peace, and grace that we live every day. Bliss and quietness of the mind. It can be yours. 16 hours of your life, and what a difference it will make. I am Joy Wisdom. Contact me at www.allonus, ALLONUS, all one us.co.uk. Thank you for your time.